ready to go. So as folks are coming in, I would like to just say good morning to you again and thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Sabria Jubilee, the Chief of Equity for the School District in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And today our learning session is on curriculum, decentering, and elevating what matters. I want to thank our exceptional panelists today who will be with us. As a quick reminder, this session is being recorded. So if you desire not to be visible in the recording, you are free to turn off your camera. In all cases, while our presenters are presenting, please make sure that you keep your microphones on mute throughout the presentation. I will be dropping a link to a Padlet in a minute where you can record any questions you may have as the panelists are going through their presentations. And then toward the end, if we have questions, we will absolutely open up the opportunity to ask some of those questions. If not, we will also share those with the panelists for future reply. So with that, I want to turn this particular session over to Dr. Nashawana Francis Thompson, who is our Deputy Chief of Curriculum and Instruction for the School District of Philadelphia. Dr. Nye, it's all yours.
Good morning, beautiful people. Good morning. As Dr. Jubilee said, first I want to thank Dr. Jubilee and her team for putting this space together so that we could all come together on Dr. King's day. And we'll get into this conversation, centering it around curriculum and equity and the amazing panelists that we have here today. I look forward to them sharing their own journey as they engage in this work. So I'm going to start off with a brief introduction. The Office of Academic Supports has a commitment to social justice through curriculum equity, and that is rooted in our culturally and linguistic and inclusive foundation. Social justice-minded leaders have always understood that exposing social relations of power was a critical part of their role. These leaders know that to create a more just society, we need to have a better understanding of how power works individually, socially, and institutionally. The ultimate goal of this panel is to provide participants with reflective and analytical tools to promote inclusive spaces and social justice practices that these leaders have used in their leadership of curriculum. So I'm going to get right into it. We have Dr. Jonaida Rodriguez, please wave, who is our Director of ELA for grades 4 to 12. We have Lauren Young, who is our Director of Math, K to 12. We have KD Davenport, who is our Director of Science, K to 12. And we have Ishmael Jimenez and Shaquita Smith representing our social studies curriculum team. First question I'm going to lead into, two of the books that we have promoted as a part of this panel. I'm going to give some background to those texts, but we also have other resources that you should have access to. But the first one, Dr. Daniel Beverly Tatum wrote, Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum wrote, "Why are all the Black kids sitting in the cafeteria together?" and other conversations about race. She originally wrote the book in 1997 and then rewrote it in 2017. And one of her goals in writing the book was to help others move beyond fear, anger, and denial to a new understanding of what racism is and how it impacts all of us, and ultimately what we can do about it. Dr. Tatum contends that in a race-conscious society, we all have a racial identity that develops in predictable ways, shaped largely by the interactions that we have with others. She believes that understanding of identity development process can help us all build bridges across lines of differences. One of the major elements of the culturally and linguistic and inclusive foundation is to develop stakeholders' ability to connect across lines of differences. And reading this text has been one way that we have begun to do this work in the Office of Curriculum and Instruction. We understand that we cannot talk about equity, justice, hope, or peace without talking about race. You cannot solve a problem without talking about it. Unfortunately, many of us have a lifetime of experiences that have told us, don't talk about it. We believe that in the classroom is where you can create those spaces for conversation. And we are centering a curriculum that allows for that to happen in meaningful ways. But we also understand that there is some prerequisite work that we all must do before being able to bring the curriculum to life. What prerequisites do you believe are the foundation for engaging in social justice and curriculum development and implementation? First up, we will have Ishmael.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Always humbled to speak in front of educators, and I know a couple of y'all, so hopefully I'll do this justice. First, I want to start off, I'm going to put in the chat too, a quote from Martin King, since it's Martin King Day, right? And I want to emphasize really where he left off, so I'm going to read it. I labored with the idea of reforming the existing institutions of the society. A little change here, a little change there. Now I feel quite differently. I think you've got to have a reconstruction of the entire society, a revolution of values. And I think a lot of folks use King's legacy and his spirit in a way that abuses it. And when we think about the prerequisites of making social justice at the crux of our curriculum, this is the idea that guides me. That not only do we have to recognize what was taught in the past, what we all have been indoctrinated with has been tainted, biased, and wrong, but we also have to recognize that we have to build something new. So one of the prerequisites that I always point to is that we have to acknowledge what we have been doing is not working, and that we have to develop new modes of thinking and ways to present material to students in order to build the world that we wish to see. Another prerequisite that I apply when I think about social justice in the curriculum is the idea that race lays at the center, especially within the American context. So when I think of social justice, I don't think of racial justice through the social justice lens. I think of social justice through the racial justice lens, because our society has not honestly wrestled with a lot of the ideas that unfortunately doesn't allow us to proceed forward in honest ways with one another. And for our children, they interpret that and internalize that at a young age. So one of those, and I just want to emphasize that the prerequisite is looking at social justice through a racial justice lens, not racial justice through a social justice lens. And so when you approach your curriculum, you understand that larger piece within the American context that allows students and helps them to navigate the real world in which we live. Not what we wish it is, not what we imagine it to be, but the real world as it is. So we can actually develop those tools further. One more prerequisite that I apply is that honesty. We have to have intellectual honesty. If I find something that changes my narrative of what happens, I have to be flexible and willing to acknowledge and not just go through cognitive dissonance and outright reject it, but then internalize and then readjust. And that's another thing I think a lot of folks, when we're thinking about social justice in the curriculum, fail to do. We do not learn and grow. We kind of like, this is the social justice piece, this is what I'm going to shove down your throat, and do not recognize that people can only process as much as they've been processed. And like Malcolm said, there was one time that you didn't know what you knew today, so why are you judging that person? And of course, Malcolm didn't say it like that, but I'm paraphrasing. So when we think about prerequisites, those ground level things, when I approach curriculum creation, lays the foundation for what it looks like and what it will become in the future.
Thank you, Ish. KD, you want to shed some light in your area of how this resonates with you?
Sure. First, Ish, I really agree with what you said about looking at how we look at racial justice and social justice. And as I look back on my career, so often we have used everything else as a proxy to avoid talking about race. We feel comfortable talking about socioeconomic differences, learning differences, gender differences, sexuality differences came before we became comfortable talking about race as educators. And that is absolutely the first step, is that we must personally be comfortable being uncomfortable talking about race. We cannot do this work if we can't do that. The other thing that has really been enlightening for me as I think about what we need to do to be prepared is to realize that as administrators at 440, we cannot know what is culturally responsive for your classroom, right? That cultural responsiveness happens between teacher and students, even between teacher and individual student. What we can do is be looking for ways to create places in the curriculum for that responsiveness to happen and give teachers access to tools that they can use.
Thank you, KD. I'm going to jump into the next question. Dr. Tatum advocates that dialogue is critical, and we heard Ish and KD talk about dialogue. And we understand that you can't move forward without talking to people and with people. Talk isn't something that comes easily, and talk by itself isn't sufficient. But you want to have these conversations because you want to inspire action. So I want to be clear on that the conversations are important to inspiring actions, but conversations in themselves is not enough. Before we could write curriculum that is rooted in equity and social justice, there were many conversations that we had to have as a curriculum team that was rooted in what was happening presently within our society, but then also going back and looking at what happened historically in the context of America. And we used Dr. Tatum's, and I'll talk a little bit more about Dr. Gholdy Muhammad's work, but we used their books and we used videos and we used articles to center our conversation. And you may be asking yourself, well, where did these conversations take place? They take place in our staff meeting. They take place in any meeting that we're having, that we're engaging in discussion around curriculum. And the team will share different ways of how their consciousness had to shift or shifted through these readings and through these dialogues that we were having within our office internally. So the second question is, how has engaging in prerequisite work enhanced or shifted your consciousness and how you approach the work? And particularly, I'm talking about curriculum development in itself. Lauren? I'm sorry, not Lauren, KD.
So as a white person, you are taught that your experience is the real experience, the default experience, and everybody else's experience is like another flavor. Like, hopefully you're taught that flavor is okay too, but it's like a different flavor than the real flavor. In order for me to engage in this work, I need to constantly remind myself of that programming and like be aware of it. So for example, I love science, and science has been a place where I felt comfortable and at home and able to see the world. It was challenging for me to hear colleagues talk about being made to feel that science wasn't for them. And my first response was defensiveness. No, well, that's not really what science is all about. I have to understand that is what science is really all about. That is part of what science is really all about. And if I can't hear that, I can't make science not about that. So for me, the title of this workshop involves decentering and recentering. I have to decenter my own experience, and that's really not easy to do. It is something you need to remind yourself to do all the time.
Thank you, KD. Ish.
Yeah, and for me, through this process, I have realized that, you know, sometimes when you talk about, you know, the things around these issues, it has been uncomfortable, right? Folks don't like it. I've felt those awkward spaces. So through this process, I've learned to lean into a lot of the things that I feel like, oh, I can't say that in public, you know what I mean? And be honest with my colleagues. And so through that process, that has also allowed me to be honest with our stakeholders and other folks, that allows other experiences and other ideas within the curriculum. And that really has broadened my horizons when I even think about the international implications of really what we're creating here in Philadelphia. Because what we are doing here is somewhat inspiring to other folks around the world, because we are leaning into it now, right? We are going to be speaking about it more now, and we are going to look at our history honestly. From the social studies lens, I have to say it encouraged me not only to be honest with my colleagues, but lean in heavily and challenge folks in a way that I was scary about when I was younger and before this process.
Thank you, Ishan. And we have questions that are coming in the chat in the Padlet, and we'll get to those questions at the end. But I'm going to go into our next section. We have created our curriculum around the culturally and historically responsive pursuits that were developed by Dr. Gholdy Muhammad. And one of my biggest fears with bringing Dr. Gholdy Muhammad's work to our curriculum was that this and fear in a sense of what happens to something great when you tokenize it, you water it down, or it appears to be unauthentic. So that was one of my hesitations of bringing this work to the district. But through engaging in the dialogues with my team and really acknowledging what was missing, there was no other choice but to bring Dr. Gholdy Muhammad's work into our curriculum, because it was the thing that was missing. So bringing her work into the curriculum, like I said, one of my fears was that I didn't want it to be tokenized, or I didn't want it to be performative by just listing her pursuits, which meant that every curriculum writer had to read Dr. Gholdy Muhammad's text. Before I even brought it to my staff, I myself attended maybe 10 sessions of her work, and my excitement was just exuding that I couldn't hold it back, that I had to share it with my team, and then turn around and purchase that book for our staff, for us to really go deeply in understanding the historically responsive pursuits. And when you see them in the curriculum, it's really a way for educators to center social justice in the curriculum. Katie shared earlier, there's no one, when you say culturally and linguistically inclusive, that's a phrase, right? But one of the things that our students in this district have also highlighted is that cultural is contextual. It's contextual to who they are. And while we can create the frame and embed it in our curriculum and center it in our curriculum, there's still work that must be done between educator and student. And student brings something into the classroom that we must be clear that that is the culture that we want to center in our classroom. So I'll share with you Dr. Gholdy Muhammad's 5 pursuits. The first one is around identity. And we want to ensure that we're teaching students to know themselves and others. One of the things that I shared with my team early on was that there's so much focus on teaching children about animals and so many books about animals, but there was no books really centered around teaching children about who they were. And that was concerning to me, that we are teaching children about animals, but we're not teaching them about themselves first, and then teaching them about others. So that's one of her pursuits around identity. The second is around skills. This is typically what we do in our classrooms. We're teaching students proficiencies that they need for a particular content area. So skills is something that we naturally do in our curriculum. One of the things that we challenge is that are those skills taught at a level that is rigorous for our children. And I don't use the word rigorous lightly, right? I think that we can have something rigorous and not think that our students are not capable of reaching that rigorous level of engagement and content. The other one is intellectualism, and that's basically teaching students knowledge. So beyond just teaching them a skill, but really giving them knowledge around a particular concept or particular idea. And you'll see that in our curriculum units that we've centered knowledge. When you look at the text that we've selected, when you look at the different performance tasks that we've utilized, we've centered knowledge in that pursuit. And then criticality is really this idea of teaching our students to understand and disrupt oppression. Ishmael started off talking about teaching our students the truth. We have to teach our students the truth. And earlier in the breakout session, one of our educators asked, like, well, what is the format, or what's the framework for doing this? Criticality is one of those tools. And one of our educators asked about, do you think technology is hindering students' ability to think critically? I said, no, that's enhancing. And that's even more of a reason why we need to teach our students to be critical, because they have so much access to so much information. And we need to be able to teach them to think about that information in critical ways, so that they can challenge the very things that they're reading, that they're seeing on social media. So I think that criticality is a place where we must root our instruction and teaching our students about oppressive systems and teaching them the truth, so that they can too push back up against these oppressive systems within the context of American society. And then the last one, one of my favorite things that I'm tuning in for myself is that there must be joy in resistance. So in spite of the resistance and in spite of the fights and the pursuits that we're going after, there's still joy and beauty in who we are as a people. And we must teach students about the beauty and the truth in humanity. And that is what joy is all about. So while I can't go in your classroom and physically show you how to bring joy to your classroom, that is one part of our framework, that we're looking for educators to be intentional about bringing joy into the classroom. Not just telling the stories of struggle, but also telling the stories of triumph. So those are the 5 pursuits that we have centered intentionally in our curriculum. And we'll hear from some of our other staff members about what that looks like. So what shifts have been made in the SDP curriculum that you believe centers social justice and equity, and why? Lauren?
Good morning. The math department, we were very intentional about creating opportunities for students that will exist long after any core resource or material, because it's grounded in the standards first. So we created performance tasks, which are that provide students with the mathematical content and the historical context, so that they can debate and critique the social structures in their communities, in their world that they live in. For example, going back to what Dr. Nye said, we engage students in a conversation around Black Wall Street, not focusing on the trauma, but the joy and the resilience that it took for a community of marginalized individuals to create an environment where they can thrive on their own. We also want students to think about using math as a means to critically analyze and carefully consider issues of oppression. So our students have access to information via social media, but not necessarily taking any and everything as fact. So how can we look at 80% and critically analyze, well, what does 80% mean? Because 80% could just be written as a means to be positive, but what's that other 20%? Who's missing, who's not at the table, and have students and provide students with an opportunity to think critically about the numbers that they see, the graphs and the tables and the charts, and ask those questions. And we did this intentionally. So the why is because we want students to gain the knowledge that social injustices exist, but not so much focusing on the trauma. So the third part of the performance task is, how can you become a change agent? Where do you see yourself, whether you're in 4th grade or you're a high school student in a geometry class? How can you take the skills that you've gained in the mathematics classroom to move forward and challenge, question these avenues and structures that clearly have inequities for all people? And I think overall, our shift that we wanted to provide students is to give them a broader range of experiences. So historically in math, we have students engaging in lemonade stands and going to amusement parks. But really, what is it that our students need to be exposed to that allow them to think critically and empower them to challenge the information that they receive? So we have high school students engaging in conversations around student loans. We have students engaging in tree equity. Why is it that I can cross the river and it's luscious and it's green, but in my own neighborhood, there might be one tree on my block? And these are things that students might not naturally question, but it is a form of oppression. And what are the impacts that our inner city has when it comes to certain areas having more trees than another, or banking? What is the difference and how does that impact me as an individual if I choose to go to a payday loan or a quick cashing place versus investing in a bank and opening up a checking account and a savings account? And really thinking about identity of students. So going back to what Dr. Nice said, is we want students to not only think about things that are part of social justice work, but also thinking about how do I as an individual can put myself in a position to do better, improve myself and my community, and what does that look like for me and my family in the current context. So it's a both and. They're engaging in the math. We want them to get those skills and concepts, but what do I do with these skills and concepts? And doing so in a way that makes sense to students. When we look at resources and tasks, one thing that I really push my team on is the reality of which we're asking students to do the math. Most of our students don't have lemonade stands. So why are we spending 2-3 days on our students analyzing the input outputs of a lemonade stand? We do have students that go to the corner store. So let's think about, if we go to a corner store and I can buy penny candy, how much penny candy can I sell and flip? And that's a foundation for entrepreneurship and engaging in those conversations with students, and encouraging their families to be a part of the conversation. Math impacts us everywhere. We see math all the time. So not just when you're cooking, because that's not all our families do, but very often in math, it's go home and cook with your family and ask this question about fractions. Really, let's talk about bills. Sit down and have a conversation with your children about bills and what are the resources that our parents need to engage in those conversations about savings, about electricity, gas, water, because very often our kids leave our high schools not knowing how to function in an adult world because the math skills are not there and there's not the bridge to connect it for our students.
Thank you, Lauren. Shaquita.
As I think about shifts in curriculum, I want to go back to Katie's comment about decentering and centering my experience and what I've learned, because I didn't grow up in Philadelphia. I grew up in Tennessee, and my experience was very much like Katie's growing up in the South, right? So, and I didn't have the privilege of having, I had the same teachers as my mom did growing up. So what she learned, I learned basically in that same experience. And it made me rethink about what I do here in Philadelphia as I develop curriculum. And like Lauren was saying, we do have performance tasks in social studies, but I also wanted to, as a social studies specialist, I also wanted to make sure that we are centering those narratives of those traditionally marginalized groups of people, and making sure that students are thinking critically about their neighborhoods, their city, their state overall, and about what they're learning in class. And just thinking about that racial justice that is in geography, right? Understanding different map projections and how they, certain map projections can be racist. And just thinking about how the narrative of women is often, especially Black women and Indigenous women, are often erased from the narrative in the fabric of the making of this nation, right? And so we wanted to make sure that we did that with our curriculum. And so I've just made a conscious effort along with Ishmael and all of our curriculum writers. I think when I started here and I looked at what was the curriculum at the time, and I'm in my mind using air quotes, it really was not a curriculum. We wanted to get away from those facts. And we wanted to get away from fact-based social studies. We wanted them to really think. And in our performance tasks, we always built in those instructional shifts where we're encouraging teachers to ensure that the students are having discussions, critical discussions about what they're seeing, what they are reading, what they are hearing, even through social media, right? And through podcasts, they're having those critical discussions. We scaffold to start out those questions, and we scaffold to help the teacher get started with those questions, with the conversation, help the students get started with those conversations. Sorry, tripping over my words here. And then we also encourage the students to draw questions, right? Look at the historical markers that are around the city. Think critically about those historical markers. Whose narrative is missing? How can you change that, right? And think about the story that historical marker is. Just for example, one of the performance tasks in 4th grade is to rewrite historical markers, right? And telling that story of the founding of Pennsylvania and William Penn and his sons, right? Retelling that story to center the narrative of Indigenous people and their experience, what they experienced at the time with William Penn and his sons. So we encourage students to do that. We encourage teachers to do that. And it's a big task, but I'm here for it and I'm ready to do the work, and I'm going to continue to try.
Thank you, Shaquita. Dr. Rodriguez?
I think with ELA, text is at the center of everything we do. So kind of adding to Shaquita's, like just making sure that like the text that we're selecting are featuring it's reflective of our population so that it's all students can see themselves in the text. And so we're trying to provide for students those like mirrors, windows, sliding doors, that concept of like really seeing themselves in the text and being able to see others in an authentic and true light, and one that's centered around joy. So we want to make sure, so one of the things we did is we started with the NYU rubric, assessing what was the text that our students accessed, and then making changes and purposely selecting text that gave students an opportunity to see themselves. And I think also important to us was authorship, so that the person who wrote the text is from that community. So if we have a book that centers around an Indigenous story, then the author is also an Indigenous person, so that the story is being told from someone within that community. We thought that that was really key and important into our text selection. And so with that, we also, similar to the other teams, focused on Dr. Muhammad's work and the 5 pursuits and how that lives in our units, in the performance task, in our overview, and how we're framing the instruction for teachers. I think part of the work that we did too is around embedding practices for students of non-English speakers, English language learners, and students who receive specialized services into our core content, so that all students have access to that tier 1 instruction, and all students have access to the text selections and the instruction that we designed in the curriculum units. I think also important is like we check in with each other. So like I know often like EDA social studies tends to have like we work together and with math, and just like and just checking in with each other to be like, does this make sense? Or is this like, we were talking through a 5th grade book selection. So I went to KD and I was like, what do you think about this book for 5th grade? And we just were able to like utilize each other because we're all on the same page and in regards to this work and the value of this work and how important this work is, but we all bring each other's strengths. So this work only happens because we also collaborate. So I think that's also part of like the shifts that we made. I think we're working together with more like a intentionality than we have in the past. And I think that goes back to, the leadership of Dr. Nye and the executive directors and bringing us together and helping us have these conversations, and then us understanding who we are and our strengths, and then being able to utilize that. So yeah, I think on top of all the wonderful things my colleagues said, I think that's the one thing I think I would add in regards to the shift that we've made as a team in helping use the curriculum to drive equity.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. Ish or Katie, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to this or we're good.
I want to add to what I said in the very beginning about being comfortable talking about race, that didn't happen to our team by accident. That was a leadership decision by Dr. Nye to make those conversations part of our work, not an accessory, not an optional after school activity. This is part of your work now, and you need to get on board with it. And I want to just appreciate her leadership on that.
Thank you. And I think that that was also critical for me as the leader, that I had to do work and continue to do the work, right? So in order to lead this work, I saw something in the question in the chat. In order to lead this work as the leader, there's some things that I had to do first before I could engage my staff in doing that work. And then before my staff could approach the work, there's some things that they had to do as well. So I think that in the first question, it was about what are the prerequisites? All of us must engage in our own internal work before we begin to do these external practices, because what can really end up happening is that if you falsely try to do or quickly try to do social justice work, it becomes very performative. And the very thing that you're looking to disrupt or challenge or change, you really could be perpetuating that exact thing. So it is very important that the prerequisite work is done. If there's something that you want your students to do, I need you to do it first. I need you to actually engage in that task before you give it to your students. And that was something that was important for me as a leader, is for me to do the work, and I continue to do the work. My team does not allow me to not do the work. I'm reading the text, I'm attending the workshops, they're moving me. Dr. Nye, did you read this? I need you to read this. I need you to go to this session. I need you. So my team also forces me to move into that space as well, to continue to do the work. And this is not a one and done thing either. This is something that we are continually working at. And there are things and mistakes that we may make in the curriculum. I want to be clear on that. And I've shared that with my team. There are mistakes that we will make in the curriculum, but it's the acknowledgement of the mistake. It's identifying the root cause. It's the correction that is important. We will make mistakes. Teachers will make mistakes in the classroom. But once you make that mistake and it's pointed out to you, whether it's from a student, whether it's from a parent, whether it's from a colleague, whether it's from an administrator, it's up to you to stop and acknowledge and try to seek understanding of what the problem was or what the issue was, and then make course corrections so that you could move forward. And our final question that I had for this panel is, what do you believe are the necessary conditions that are needed to continue to advance social justice and equity in the STP curriculum, and why? We know that writing a curriculum in itself is not going to be the thing that'll bring equity and social justice. We are very clear on that. But what are the necessary conditions that we believe will continue to advance social justice and equity in the SDP curriculum, and why? And I'll start with Shaquita.
Oh, I'm so glad you started with me. That's something that we focus on in our professional developments with teachers all the time, is that we can give you all the tools you need. We can give you resources. We can give you great, effective curriculum. But if you are not willing to do the work yourself, it's just going to fall by the wayside. It's not going to work. It's not going to have an impact. So I think that for me, I have to continue to do the work. I have to continue to address my biases, and even new biases that I didn't even realize I had as I'm going through and doing this work, because I do come with biases. I come with biases about lots of things, and I have to address those as I'm addressing this work. I think that we have to make sure that we are inviting teachers in and inviting principals in to be a part of this work, and not only teachers and principals, but everyone in the school district who is doing it. We invite you in to do this work. We don't want to force you to do the work, because if we force you to do the work, it's once again not going to have the impact it's intended to have, right? Which is critically thinking about society. As a social studies person, it's critically thinking about society and acting on how to improve society, right? In the end, as Ishmael was saying, in the end, rebuild those structures that exist in society to create something better, and really what society is intended to do. And so I think that in order for us, like I said, once again, for us to be able to continue this work and continue for to advance the social justice and equity work that we're doing, we're definitely going to have to continue to address our biases, it's a process. It's a process that is ongoing all the time. And we're going to have to continue that process within ourselves and as a team. We're also going to have to continue that process with our teachers and everybody that's part of the school district and the school community as a whole, right? And continue to invite them in. We may not get everybody this round. We'll get more the next round and more the next round and more the next round as we continue to do the work.
Thank you, Shaquita. Lauren?
Very similar to what Shaquita said, I think one of the necessary conditions is ongoing self-reflection and self-interrogation. This work starts with each and every one of us as individuals, and also being open to the idea to be self-reflective and a means to consider other possibilities and perspectives when it comes to the curriculum. We have to step back and ask ourselves reflective questions, like, where did I get this information from? Why do I think this is important? Do I know this deeply enough, or is this just something that I am regurgitating as an old practice within the field of education? Where is this coming from? Like, what ideas am I unintentionally putting into my classroom that supports a passive oppressive structure? And we, as a math department, we asked ourselves these questions. We've asked our curriculum writers these questions as we were building out the performance task, even down to the daily formative task and opening routines. What are we putting out there that we might not know can have an impact on students, and what might we be saying is fact when actually that's not fact, and there's other perspectives to be thought of. And even within yourself, we are all passionate about something. So also being mindful that as I'm sharing this information, am I showing one perspective as being more or sound than another because it's important to me? And what does that mean for my students? And I actually caught myself doing this with one of our performance tasks on redlining in the city of Philadelphia. I'm born and raised in North Philly, and I'm watching my community change monthly, and it's not the same community I grew up in. So when you get to that performance task in 8th grade, there's a lot of information that's there, and there's a lot the students are doing, but I had to step back and say, why am I spending hours on this? Because this was important to me. It is important to me because I'm watching my cousins, my nieces and nephews, my aunts and uncles no longer be able to afford the home they lived in for years because of what's happening in our city. But also to being mindful of how does that impact the receivers of this performance task and their perspective on what's happening in our city. And there also needs to be a healthy balance on that as well. Again, going back to, in order to advance this social justice and equity in our curriculum, we have to be open-minded to the multiple perspectives. We have to be open, and we also have to challenge our colleagues. Like, we have colleagues that say in our buildings, our students can't do this work. This is too hard for them. This isn't a priority. I have to star test. There's so many things that we say passively, but have a larger impact on what our students engage with every single day. So I challenge all of you to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Because when someone says these kids can't do it, who are these kids? Who are you talking about? Let's put names to faces. And I guarantee that will begin to shift the conversation greatly. So back to what Katie said, a science being open to everyone. When we look up and think about what students do we actually give those extracurricular opportunities in science, those after school programming cards to, because we feel that others may not be ready or they may not be prepared to participate. We have to recognize that we have more power in our classroom than we think we do. And that power goes into our babies' brains, and then they believe that this is fact because they are looking up to us as the leader. They're looking up to us as being the source of sound information. So whatever my teacher says, that's what my teacher says. I have kids, they come home, they say the same thing, well, my teacher said. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm telling you as your mom. So please take that back with you. And I challenge you all to be comfortable, being uncomfortable, to have these conversations.
Thank you, Lauren. Dr. Jubilee gave us an extra, 5 minutes? So we have an extra 5 minutes. I don't know if anyone else on the panel would like to shed light on that last question, or we would want to get into any of the questions that we've seen in the chat that have come through.
I just wanted to add in regards to conditions, we need everyone, we need you all, when we had unit reviews and invited folks from the community and parents and teachers, we need that feedback. Because as we're so in the work, we have our own blind spots that we don't see. So, having teachers submit feedback on the Google form on the site, or just having folks attend our unit reviews and look at our units, review them, and then provide us with that honest feedback is valuable to making sure that our work is reflective and inclusive and of all of our students and what they need.
I'd like to speak on, there was a couple comments in the chat about, teachers and people not willing to do the work, they're uncomfortable. I think one of the ways that we help them to get comfortable is they're not hearing the right, they need to be invited in. And so I think inviting them in is allowing them that open space to ask those questions and not lay blame. I think one of the things that we do great in our professional development sessions when we started our social justice professional development sessions, we actually invited them in. There was no blame. It was we're all here. We're all doing the work. We all have our own biases. We all come in with them. And we just, the point is to address them and keep it moving forward. But I also think about that uncomfortable thing. And it makes me think to mental health. We're all uncomfortable. We don't want to go to a therapist and we don't want to talk to a therapist, but you have to, in order to do the work to get better at who you are. And so we're here to continue to invite those people in and welcome those people who voluntarily come in and say, let's do the work. I don't think I even think about the teachers being uncomfortable. I'm just thinking about inviting you in. And when you're ready, you will come.
And I just want to veggie back off of that a little bit and emphasize the importance of realizing folks ain't where, we all are growing, right? And when we're growing, we have to acknowledge that folks might not be there. But I'm going to paraphrase this quote, and it's the PG-13 version of it that I saw over the last weekend, is that the bee doesn't have to convince the fly that honey tastes better than poop, right? And that we have to be creating it and showing folks that we're actually doing the work more than we are telling folks to do the work. And it's from example, right? And it's also from the example of the teachers that we bring into the fold as they develop. I could tell you, as someone who's been doing new hire orientation for the last four years for all social studies teachers, folks are coming in hungry to really get into the guts of this type of work. And that we have to really support them and recognize and tell them the truth about what they're walking into in order so we can move forward together. So I just definitely want to emphasize the bee doesn't have to convince the fly that honey tastes better than poop.
Any other questions, thoughts, anything for the team? We have about 2 minutes left. We want to be respectful of your time.
I saw there was a question around classroom libraries and looking for funding, resources, and where to start. I would say that the Free Library is a great partner of ours, and they've helped us curate book lists that align to our unit. So if you're a teacher, you can reach out to your children's librarian. And I know that it's not, they would let you class sets of books, or not class sets, I'm sorry, books to add, supplement your classroom library. In regards to purchasing, they may also have some contacts. We know that there's organizations such as We Need Diverse Books that offers grants and small mini grants for classroom libraries and things like that. And then as we get them, if you join our ELA distribution list, when they reach out to us, we send email blasts to information to teachers around grants and opportunities to enhance classroom libraries. So it's just that I saw that question in the PHILAT. Thought I would address it.
Thank you. It's 10:35. Just to wrap up, I want to thank each of you for engaging in this space with the Curriculum and Instruction Office. We have tons of professional learning that happens. I'm sorry, Dr. Brooks also put something in the chat, but I wanted to first and foremost acknowledge Dr. Malika Savoy Brooks, who is the Chief Academic Supports Office, who created the space for us to even engage in this work. She had a vision for what she wanted our curriculum to look like, and she created the space so that we all could authentically engage in this work. So I want to acknowledge and thank Dr. Brooks for her leadership and really allowing us to move in a way that we needed to move to bring equity to our curriculum and continue to do that work. I think we also have one of our executive directors that are also on the line, Dr. Jayla Olds Pearson. So thank you as well for joining. And again, thank you to our panelists. We also have Debbie Way, who's newly added to our team. So we're excited. Debbie Wave. Debbie's been hitting up your chat with some amazing resources. So we are building a dynamic team. Join us. We are looking for more. So thank you. And thank you, Dr. Jubilee, again.
Thank you. Can we give our panelists a virtual round of applause? Use your Zoom emojis. We thank you so much for sharing your expertise, sharing your heart with us as you continue to navigate this work and are in the trenches to make these things happen for our children. We are excited to continue to build community and space for these conversations and to continue to enhance and grow. And so panelists, thank you again. And participants, thank you for being so gracious and sharing in the chat. We also have folks update the Padlet. So any questions or thoughts or reflections that you posted there, we will connect with the panelists and have kind of a open reply after the session. The summit is over today. What I will ask before you leave us is if you are staying with us for session 2, you don't need to do anything for the survey, but if this is your only time joining us for panel discussion, please fill out the survey that I just dropped in the chat. And we want to hear from you. Your feedback is welcomed. So session 2, if you're going to a different session or a panel, there's a separate link for that. So you'll need to log out of this Zoom link and go find that. Those will start at 10:45. You'll be led into the Zoom rooms in about 3 minutes. If you're staying with us for our second set of panels in this particular Zoom, then you can just stay on the line and we will welcome our new panelists shortly. Thank you all again and have a great day.